Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy,
And I'm Brian.
and we want to thank everybody who has listened to our preview episodes last month. And we would also like to thank everyone who has joined us on social media. We will be putting out our first Patreon episode this week. Brian and I will be discussing the Nicolas Cage classic, Lord of War. And you can find that at patreon.com/Crescent City Crime.
And thanks to everyone for your support. We value that highly, and it means a lot to us.
Yes. And thank you for helping to spread the word as well. So, Brian, I have deep feelings on cold cases. What about you?
Yes, one of the causes of it is a lack of proactive policing. In some causes, slow response times.
Departments are underfunded too. We will touch on this a little bit in this episode, but evidence rooms are typically a mess as well.
Yes. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Today's episode is going to be about two cold cases that have happened in New Orleans, Louisiana. The first one is the story of Vanessa Baden. Brian, have you ever heard the name Vanessa Baden?
Yes.
Okay. What do you remember about it?
Just the name.
Okay. Well, on January 2nd, 1990, the mutilated body of 19-year-old Vanessa Baden was found inside an abandoned New Orleans building. The last time she was seen by her family was in the early morning hours of December 15th, 1989. The young woman had been attending classes to become a medical assistant, and since she was the youngest of four children. At the time of this recording, it has been over 30 years since her death, and her family is still waiting for answers. Anything to say about the?
I wasn't in police work at the time. That's
Okay.
that I knew.
Okay. Vanessa's niece, Danielle, said that on December 14th around 8 p.m., she witnessed her aunt talking with some neighborhood boys. A fight broke out amongst them. Another one of Vanessa's relatives, Tiffany, saw what happened. Tiffany said that one of the boys shoved Vanessa and another boy intervened and protected her. Vanessa's brother Waldo said that on that same night between 11:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m., an unknown person called the house. Vanessa went to answer it, but Waldo told her to go to bed. And there is not any information on who was on the phone. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, so the morning of December 15th, Waldo got up to go to work, and Vanessa was also awake. She was watching television. And Vanessa's grandmother lived across the street from the house that Vanessa lived in with her mother and her brothers. Her grandmother saw Vanessa outside at 6 a.m., and she was probably the last family member to see Vanessa alive. At 6:30 a.m., Waldo went to work. He said that the door was wide open, but he did not see Vanessa. He assumed that Vanessa had gone to bed. Because of the sequence of events that morning, it was not known by her family that she was missing until much later. The family called Vanessa's friends and then the police. And remember, this is 1989. We did not have cell phones. We certainly did not have smartphones. So if your parents were looking for you and they had to call your friends, like they were calling the landlines.
Yeah, that's true. Or they would have to call businesses that you frequented and ask for you, which these days, sounds kind of weird, but that's the way it was back then. In my case, there were times in which if I was late coming home from school, they would call a B. Dalton bookseller on Canal Street and ask if the kid with the red Colorado backpack was in the store or was upstairs playing with the computers.
It was a very different world back then. It really was. It's just you have so many ways to get in touch with people now, and ways that you can keep track of your kids now too. Unfortunately, though, nobody could locate Vanessa. Christmas came and went, and there was no sign of her at all. And it would be 3 weeks after Vanessa's disappearance that her mutilated remains would be found. A property caretaker came across her body in an empty building just a block away from her Gentilly home. The post mortem report said that Vanessa had been raped. Her murderer killed her by cutting her throat, and after she died, her body had been burned. It is suspected that whoever killed Vanessa tormented the family with threatening phone calls for several weeks after the funeral.
One of the reasons why police can be slow to respond to situations like this is if it's a young person. Police usually assume that the young person simply ran away.
I also want to point out here that Vanessa Bowden was a black woman. And we all know how wonderfully the police treat people of color in our society.
Yes, although I have to add to that, when I was in police work, I saw police officers of color behave exactly the same way.
You mean like as white cops would?
Yes,
Ah, okay.
yes. Oh, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And not, I don't want to get too far off topic, but that's a very good point that you brought up.
Yeah, that's an example of you could say, people of different ethnicities united to a common cause in a kind of in a dark way.
Oh, right. I see what you mean. Yeah. Now, recently, New Orleans cold case detectives have been looking into Vanessa's death. Detective Winston Harbin has reopened the case and he sent away pieces of Vanessa's clothing for DNA analysis. Harbin also swabbed Vanessa's family members for DNA and logged it into CODIS. I'm not exactly sure why he did that, but apparently that was a thing he did. Now, Detective Harbin believes that Vanessa's body was moved from the site where the murder took place to the storage shed where she was found. And since people in the neighborhood would have heard the murder take place due to the shed's close proximity to homes, he also believes that multiple people were part of the murder. So he doesn't think it was just one guy. And when I say multiple, that suggests to me more than two people, even.
With young people in a situation like that, there's peer pressure involved. As in some of the other friends just simply go along with it.
Right, right.
And it's it is kind of it's part of like a clique or clan mentality.
Like a mob mentality.
Group of young people like that. Yeah.
Well, it's not just young people; it's a lot of people.
Right.
But yes, that's true. Sadly, Vanessa's case could possibly have been solved sooner, since there was a rape kit done on her remains. But the New Orleans police purged the department's evidence room between 1999 to 2002 and threw away her rape kit, along with evidence from over 55 other open investigations. Do you have any experience with the evidence room with the NOPD facility, Brian?
I've experienced checking stuff into the evidence room. I mean, more of this on another podcast. There was an occasion I had to check a number 3 driver, a golf club into property and evidence. I'll get into the reason why I remember that it was a number 3 driver another time. But my my memories of the evidence room from the across the cage was that of what appeared to be like a 1960s to 1970s time capsule. Looked like it was like really old. And I remember one of the guys, his nickname was Stokey.
Stokey.
Yeah, his nickname was Stokey, where he worked property and evidence, and he looked about as old as the property and evidence room.
Oh.
But people who work officers who work property and evidence, they're typically older officers who are very, very comfortable with the way things are, and they're not the kind of people to look for to change things or to organize the evidence room.
So
yeah, it always looked like
in other
a mess.
words,
It always looked old.
It's another case of the police not doing their job.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, to them, they were doing their job because they would, they would receive the evidence, tag it, give a receipt, retrieve it for prosecutors for court,
Mm.
typically. But the disorganized state that it's historically been in, which I first noticed during the '90s, late '90s, it's not exactly, it doesn't exactly facilitate investigations.
Mm. Yeah, well, even though we are talking in this instance about New Orleans, this problem with evidence kits being lost, tampered with, or damaged is not a new thing. Authorities across the country have lost, mishandled, or even outright destroyed tens of thousands of DNA samples since genetic fingerprinting revolutionized crime solving 20 years ago. Now, evidence is even sometimes dumped after a high profile exoneration. So, of course, this means a victim can be unable to have biological proof that will positively identify their attackers.
Now, I do have an example of like evidence being lost in the evidence room. I got a personal experience with it. It was a marijuana arrest that I had, which was the result of a traffic stop. Uh, Whereas the vehicle just had everything wrong with it. The brake tag was expired. There was no license plate. The trunk lock had been punched. It was a early model Chevy that had the steering wheel column broken. So I thought I had a '67A, a stolen vehicle. And then it turned out it was his father's car and had been previously stolen, broken into, all that stuff. And all I had on him was the marijuana, but I didn't know that it wasn't a stolen car until later, after I brought him in and booked the marijuana, the little bag of weed and the property of evidence. And he goes to trial. It's like a couple months later, going to trial just for the marijuana and resisting arrest. And the district attorney very discreetly told me that they're having trouble finding the evidence. So we're gonna, he said, just give your best poker face, look confident, and we're just gonna wait them out and hope that he changes his plea to guilty, which he did because the the prosecutor didn't want us tell them that the evidence was lost. So we waited him out, and he pled guilty. And later on, I had learned that stuff like drugs turns up missing for sometimes for reasons other than disorganization and evidence, right? But that's another topic.
And and the person gets locked up for the drugs for years and years while the evidence is destroyed or used or stolen.
Yeah, or possibly stolen by a police officer, as I thought.
Of course.
More than a couple of times, I've met off-duty police officers at certain functions, like painting a boat or crawfish boil and smoking weed. Another topic.
Well, okay. Well, Brian, what do you have to say about evidence just being purged all over the place, and even the high profile exonerations, the evidence being lost after that?
It's a problem stemming from disorganization and a failure to follow procedures.
Well, I also feel like, do you ever feel like any of this could be malicious?
Indifference.
Yeah.
And it's also possible that some of the officers responsible for handling this stuff have just fallen into such complacency and serving the public as nothing more than a means of collecting a check and benefits. Well, that's another topic.
Yes, it is another topic. I know we're going to have many topics. We're going to have many topics on this podcast. Now back to the New Orleans evidence room again. A Denver Post article from 2016 highlights the problem with the evidence room for Orleans Parish specifically. Quote, inside, there are dozens of guns piled into a shopping cart. A bloody shirt and 2 rape kits lie under a bicycle wheel. And strewn everywhere are marijuana leaves, gnawed by rodents whose carcasses workers remove twice weekly from sticky traps. The Orleans Parish Evidence Room is a dump and a case study in the chaos that often rules evidence storage across the United States. So this is a national problem.
I'll admit the like the evidence room at the NOPD. It's last I knew it needed a woman's touch and never got it.
They need somebody with organizational skills. They should hire a professional organizer. There are people who make their careers out of organizing things, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, maybe the evidence room should have a bring your wife to work day.
Well, men can be organizers too. Well, not around here, not in our house, but men can be organizers too.
Mm-hmm.
If you listeners want an accurate portrayal of this issue, the law, I remember specifically, I had to look up what season and episode this was, but the Law and Order Special Victims Unit episode Behave, that's season 12, episode 3, highlights the backlog of evidence kits across the country. Mariska Hargitay of Law and Order fame founded the Joyful Heart Foundation in 2004. Part of the foundation's mission is to end the backlog. And if you want to support that foundation, I'm going to link the foundation's website on our blog, nolacrimepodcast.com. So, in spite of Vanessa's rape kit being lost, New Orleans cold case detectives are still actively working the case. They say that they have found new evidence, but they haven't released information on what it is. And we can only hope that someday, somehow, some way, this case will be solved, because this has been over 30 years of a family waiting for answers.
Yeah, 30 years is a long time. A lot happens in that time. The family of the typically the family of a victim, has moved on by that time, but the thoughts of their loved one are there every single day.
Yeah.
But if you lose a friend or a family member prematurely, or tragic death, chances are you're going to think about that person at some point of the day, even if it's 30 years later.
Yeah. And I just want to say, if anybody by any chance is listening to this podcast, and if you know something, do the right thing. So the second case I want to talk about on this episode is Thomas Rolfs. Do you remember Thomas Rolfs? Do you remember this one?
No.
Okay, well, you might remember it when I start talking about it. Thomas Rolfs was a Missouri native. He went to college at Tulane University. And while he was at school, he met his fiancee, Liz Fried. On the weekend of May 16th, 2016, Thomas and Liz traveled from St. Louis to New Orleans. They wanted to get married in New Orleans, and they were going to tour wedding venues in the city. For whatever reason, Thomas and Liz arrived on separate flights. Thomas arrived in New Orleans first. He checked into the hotel, and then he left to go meet some friends of his at the Uptown Bar, Miss May's, a very popular drinking spot.
Oh yeah, that's at Magazine Street and Napoleon Avenue.
Right, so keep that location in your mind. Magazine Street, Napoleon Avenue.
Yeah, it's a nice part of town.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a very nice part of town. It's very popular. It's pretty well traveled, crowded at night, especially on a weekend. When Liz got into New Orleans later that evening, she decided to stay at the hotel and expecting that Thomas would meet her there soon. The couple spoke on the phone when she got to the hotel, and that was the last time Liz would hear from him. Thomas left the bar at 2:39 a.m. a surveillance camera captured video of him leaving Miss Mays by himself. And from the point where the surveillance footage ends, it's not known if he was on foot or had gotten into a car. Less than an hour later at 3:29 a.m., surveillance footage shows Thomas entering the Delta Fuel gas station at South Claiborne Avenue and Toledano Streets. The gas station is about 2 miles away from Miss May's bar. The gas station shows that he purchased 2 bottles of water, which his family thinks may be a red flag. According to his family, he did not believe in buying bottled water for environmental reasons. His father, Ron, said he would yell at me if I bought bottled water because it wasn't good for the earth. The next time he was seen alive was 21 minutes later and 2 blocks from the gas station. This was at the intersection of Amelia Street and South Claiborne Avenue, where another camera at a nearby business captured his final moments alive. Detective Winston Harbin, same person who was working on Vanessa Bowden's case, is also working on this case. He describes the footage as from the time he comes into view of that camera, he's running and then he collapses. Running means the altercation occurred beyond the view of the camera, and this is where he ends up. At 4:30 a.m., a driver saw the body of young Thomas lying on the ground and called 911. At the scene, Thomas's cell phone was found, but his wallet was not. There was never any trace of someone using his credit cards, and his loved ones say he very rarely carried cash. Police said that Thomas had injured his hands in a struggle and that Thomas was shot, ran a few blocks, collapsed, and then died. Investigators never found any gun shell casings, which means that he could have been shot from the inside of a car.
Yeah, he obviously collapsed from the blood loss, and prior to collapsing, you feel very, very nauseous. It's bleeding to death is a terrible way to die, and when you collapse, that means you don't have enough adenine triphosphate, oxygen, water, and sugar going to the cells in your body, so you have no energy. And you feel, very, very sick, and you just can't move anymore. And that particular part of town, like if you want to pick a polar opposite for the polar opposite of where he was earlier, Magazine Street, Napoleon Avenue. Yeah, it's South Claiborne.
That's a rough area.
Yeah, that South Claiborne area where you have the interstate. It's a rough part of historic Treme. That can be very dangerous.
And I don't think he was
at
walking.
nighttime.
Yeah. I would not advise anybody to walk that neighborhood. And I don't think he was going back to his hotel, because I did read that they were staying downtown. So if they were staying in a downtown hotel and then going uptown, and going towards South Claiborne Avenue, that is not the way back to downtown.
Yeah, that's the opposite direction.
So now, do you think, because it was about less than an hour from the time that he left the bar to the time that he was seen on the film at the gas station, do you think it's feasible he walked that far in less than an hour?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The average person should only take you about 15 minutes to walk a mile.
Okay.
And what I think happened, I think he did something very foolish. I think he wanted to get some marijuana, and he did the very worst thing you could possibly do if you're looking to purchase marijuana, is do what's called fishing. Just poke around the streets and start asking people. It's a really good way to get robbed and even murdered. To do something like that, or at the very least get ripped off.
Yeah, and we want to make it clear, if he was trying to look for something that was off the books, we're not blaming him. It is always on the person who actually took his life. It is that person's fault. It's not Thomas's fault.
Yeah, just
be careful.
Walking, just fishing blind is just it's inadvisable.
in all seriousness, if you are in an unfamiliar city and you want to know where to score certain things, and I'm only going to say that I speak from experience on this, ask your hotel clerk.
Yeah, or hotel concierge, or yeah, the desk clerk. Yeah,
They
yeah,
they they get those requests all the time. Like I said, speaking from experience, that's all I'm saying about it.
yeah. Now some hotel desk clerks actually have a list of people who will who will come to the hotel within minutes notice to facilitate the transaction.
Yes, a professional.
Yeah, someone whom the hotel desk clerk trusts.
Yes.
And usually it's a list of 5 to 10 people, and they just go down the list until they get a hold of someone.
Well, but of course, I mean, aside from that, we can only speculate on why and how he walked all that way. But what do you think about the bottle of water? Like, you know how a lot of people joke about, oh, if I order decaf coffee, it means I'm being kidnapped. Do you really think that this is something like that? Do you think he was trying to signal something in the hopes that his family would look at that footage and notice that something was off?
It is possible. It's also possible that he was foolish enough to get into a car with someone who promised to help him acquire whatever the
Off the books
whatever the
goods. Yeah,
illicit stuff he wanted was, and they sent him in to get. Let's see. Did he take money out of an ATM there too? They maybe told him to buy them
no, it
buy him
doesn't.
some water.
I don't see anything in my notes about an ATM transaction, but they did say that his wallet did not have. Well, they didn't know if he had any cash. I mean, he could have hit an ATM anywhere, really.
Hmm. So the water may not have been for him.
No, it's very, very strange, and it's very, very sad. And it's been about 5 years, well, just over 5 years now, and his family is still looking for answers. And Detective Harbin has said that they have new DNA evidence in the case, but of course, they're not going to release that information because they don't want to compromise their investigation. And I don't really have any more thoughts on Thomas Rolfs, but do you have anything else to say?
Well, yeah. Once again, that part of Treme, South Claiborne along the interstate. Not only is it dangerous to go looking to buy drugs there at nighttime, it's dangerous to even be there
Yeah,
at nighttime.
I wouldn't even ride my bike through there at night.
Not only is there the threat of being robbed and murdered on that street, but also people drive like maniacs at nighttime, especially on the weekend.
Yeah.
And so, I've witnessed numerous accidents over the years in that area in particular. So it's dangerous in that way as well. Probably even more so than criminal activity.
Yeah, so it's dangerous to be a pedestrian in that part of town. It's dangerous to be a driver in that part of town.
Oh yeah, yeah. One night I've literally witnessed a it was this Honda that was dressed up like it was out of Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift, and I had already seen him coming in the rearview mirror, and I moved to get out of his way, to give him like 2 full lanes, and he's trying to turn onto Esplanade Avenue to go toward, like he's going towards that part of the French Quarter, the backside of the quarter, and he turns too soon. He doesn't turn on the Esplanade. He turns onto the sidewalk and collides with the traffic signal. And I sped up to get out of the way because the traffic signal collapsed. It was a large one,
Oh yeah, you told me about that.
and the vehicle had spun around, and there was black smoke. And I also had to move to get out of the way of his car battery flew out of the engine block area, and I had to move out of the way of the car battery. And when I drove past it again later that night, I saw there was battery acid in the street, and the battery was still in the street,
Wow.
and the hood was off the car.
We should have a whole episode devoted to your late night Uber stories, because that's where that one came from, right? You were driving
Yeah,
Uber, yeah.
and I don't know if the guy was okay or not, but I also saw him get out and run away.
Oh my.
He was probably drunk and he was afraid of getting arrested for DUI.
Don't drink and drive. Get an Uber. It's just better that way.
Oh yes.
So, dear listeners, in our next episode, we are going to talk about the life, death, and legacy of the musical artist Magnolia Shorty. And goodbye, dear listeners. We will talk to you again soon.
Good night, and remember, if it's dark and it's dangerous at nighttime, don't even be there in the first place.
Good advice.